The night her husband stopped seeing her as a wife and started seeing her as a burden, Molynes Road itself seemed to hold its breath. Long before anybody on that street would learn that Marsha Bennett was one signature away from inheriting a $900 million empire, long before whispers of Beverly Hills mansions and Cherry Gardens keys and Red Hills titles would start flying through Kingston like wildfire, Marcia sat in a dim little room on Molynes Road with a fever in her bones, pain in her chest, and a marriage collapsing around her, one cold look at a time. If anybody had passed her window that evening and looked in carefully, they would have seen a woman trying not to fall apart in a house she had once turned into a home with her own hands. They would have seen her sitting on the edge of the bed in a faded nightgown, one hand pressed against her ribs, the other holding a chipped cup of ginger tea gone lukewarm. They would have seen the slow rise and fall of her shoulders as she fought to breathe through a pain that had become a regular part of her days. What they would not have seen was the memory of the life she used to have. What they would not have seen was the fact that every object in that room held some ghost of who she had once been. There was a time when Marsha Bennett was the kind of woman people talked about with warmth in their voices. On Molynes Road, where everybody seemed to know everybody else's business, she had been known for her smile before anything else. She was the woman who would stop to greet schoolchildren by name on their way home, who kept a little extra sugar in the cupboard because Miss Janet, 2 houses down, always ran out at the wrong time, who could season chicken so well that neighbors only had to catch the scent drifting over the fence to know supper was serious in the Bennett yard. She was not rich, she was not flashy, but she carried a kind of dignity that made her presence feel bigger than the little house she lived in. Back when she and Dwayne had first moved into that house, they had called it their beginning. It was not much to look at from the road. The grillwork on the windows needed repainting even then. The front step had a chipped edge. The bathroom tap dripped at night like a bad habit. But Marsha had planted crotons along one side of the walkway and hibiscus near the gate, and in just a few months, the place had started to feel softer, brighter, more alive. She had a way of doing that. She knew how to make small things feel precious. She knew how to take little and stretch it into enough. Dwayne used to love that about her. At least, that was what he had told her. In those early years, he would come home laughing, loosen his tie at the door, and call out to her before he even took off his shoes. Sometimes he would find her in the kitchen, swaying to old songs, playing softly from the radio. Sometimes she would hear his car and run to the veranda with that bright look in her eyes that made him feel like a king even when he had barely enough money in his pocket to buy patties for 2. They built dreams in that little house. Not giant dreams at first, honest dreams. A better fridge, a bigger vehicle one day, maybe a child, maybe 2. A stronger life than either of them had grown up with. They did not know then how fragile happiness could be when it rested in the hands of a man who loved being cared for more than he loved caring back. The illness had come quietly, like bad weather gathering so far off in the distance that nobody bothered to look twice. At first, it was tiredness. Marsha would finish washing and feel a strange heaviness in her arms. Then came the dizzy spells. Then mornings when getting out of bed felt like trying to move through wet cement. She told herself it was stress, too much work, not enough rest. She drank bush tea. She prayed harder. She kept going. Jamaican women, like Marsha, were trained by life to keep going even when their bodies begged for mercy. But her body was not asking anymore. It was warning. Some days her joints burned so badly that buttoning a blouse took all the patience she had. Some nights she would wake with a pounding in her chest and fear flooding through her before her eyes even opened. Her legs, once quick and sure, had started betraying her. The short walk from bedroom to kitchen became a thing she had to measure. Her appetite slipped away. Her weight dropped. Even her laughter grew faint, as if her spirit was using less energy because her body had none to spare. The doctors did not give clean answers. They gave possibilities, tests, more appointments, specialist referrals, words with too many syllables and not enough certainty. One said it might be autoimmune. Another wanted neurological evaluation. Another said they needed more scans. Every visit ended with papers, prescriptions, and costs that hung over them like storm clouds. At first, Dwayne had played the role people expect a husband to play. He drove her to appointments. He asked questions in front of doctors. He stood close enough to look concerned. When family called, he sounded burdened but loyal, speaking in that careful voice men use when they want credit for enduring hardship. But inside the house, away from other eyes, the cracks began showing fast. He did not like inconvenience. He did not like having his routine disturbed. He did not like money leaving his hand unless he felt the spending made him look successful. Most of all, he did not like that Marcia's sickness shifted attention away from him. At first, his frustration came in sighs, then in muttering, then in remarks he would later claim she took the wrong way. You always tired. Every little thing become problem now. So Dr. Still-chan, tell you are wrong? How long does it go guan like this? Each sentence sounded small by itself, but pain does not always enter like a knife. Sometimes it enters like water through a crack, slowly filling every room until the whole house is drowning. By the time Marcia realized how deeply Dwayne had changed, she was already too weak to challenge him the way she once would have. That truth shamed her more than she liked to admit. There had been a version of herself that would have looked him dead in the eye and said, "Do not speak to me like that." There had been a version of herself that would have refused to shrink just because someone else had grown cruel. But illness alters more than flesh. It rearranges pride. It makes a woman negotiate with indignity because she has no energy left for war. One Monday morning, Molynes Road woke under a hard, bright sun. Vendors were already setting up near the corner. A man pushing a handcart shouted about sweet oranges. Route taxis blared music loud enough to shake zinc fences. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried and a dog answered. The whole road was alive with the usual restless movement of Kingston life. But inside the Bennett house, the air was thick and stale. Marcia had barely slept. She had spent most of the night with a sharp ache along her side and a strange chill that no blanket could fix. By morning, she had enough strength to sit up, but not enough to stand for long. She was resting against two pillows when Dwayne came into the room, already dressed for work, the smell of cologne sharp around him. He stopped in the doorway and looked at her with a face so blank it frightened her more than anger would have. "You still day so?" His tone was flat, not curious, not tender. She wet her lips. "I wasn't feeling good from innerdy night." He checked the time on his phone and gave a short laugh that held no humor. "Every day is something with you now, Marcia. Every blessed day." The words landed harder than they should have, maybe because her body already hurt everywhere else. She adjusted herself slowly, careful not to show how the movement cost her. "Me trying, Dwayne. Trying, he said the word like it offended him. Trying to cook breakfast. Trying to wash clothes. Trying to pay no bill. She looked at him, really looked, and for a second felt the emptiness of someone standing where her husband used to be. "You think me want this?" His jaw tightened. "I never say you want it. But me tired of living like this. Me come home problem. Me wake up problem. Whole house feel like hospital." Something in her chest dropped. She had known he was impatient. She had known he was colder. But there was a special cruelty in hearing a sick woman described as if she were bad weather that had overstayed. The fan clicked overhead. Outside, a horn blared. From next door came the scraping sound of Miss Gloria's broom against concrete. The ordinary noises of morning carried on, almost mocking the silence inside the bedroom. Marcia lowered her eyes because the humiliation of being watched in pain by a man who despised the sight of it was too much to bear. She wanted to say more. She wanted to remind him of the vows he had once spoken with tears in his eyes. She wanted to ask him what sickness had revealed about his love, that health had hidden so well. But her strength failed her before her courage did. He left for work without another word. After he drove off, she sat in the hush he left behind and stared at the wardrobe across from the bed. The mirror on its door reflected a woman she barely recognized. Her cheeks had hollowed, her eyes looked too large in her face. Even her skin seemed duller, as if light itself was finding less reason to remain on her. She began to cry then, quietly at first, because on Molynes Road, sound traveled, and the last thing she wanted was pity leaking through the walls. But once the tears started, they came with force, not just for the words he had said that morning, but for everything those words confirmed. She cried for the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming. She cried because she could feel her marriage rotting around her and had no idea whether it could be saved. She cried because sickness is one loneliness, but being resented for being sick is another kind altogether. By noon, she forced herself out of bed. Pride still lived in her, even if faintly. She washed her face. She tied her head with a scarf. She moved slowly into the kitchen, one hand sliding along the wall for balance. The sink held plates from the day before. The counter needed wiping. Rice was soaking in a pot. She stood there breathing through the exhaustion, trying to decide what could be managed without collapsing. The kitchen window looked out toward the narrow strip of yard and the lane beyond. She could hear neighborhood life rising and falling in waves, schoolchildren coming home, a woman laughing loudly, somebody arguing over a gate left open. Molynes Road had a rhythm that never softened for one person's sorrow. As she rinsed the plates, dizziness swept over her so suddenly that she gripped the edge of the sink and bowed her head. Her heart hammered. Her hands shook. For a few frightening seconds, she thought she might black out right there and wake on the kitchen floor alone. When the wave passed, she leaned back against the counter, trembling, and whispered a prayer she did not even shape into full sentences. By the time Dwayne came home that evening, she had managed a pot of soup and some hard dough bread on a tray. The small effort had drained her so completely that she could barely sit upright in the chair when she heard his key at the door. He entered talking into his phone, voice lower than usual, softer in a way she had not heard, directed at her in months. A smile touched his mouth as he listened. Real smile, warm smile, the kind that used to belong to her. When he saw Marcia watching him from the dining table, the smile vanished like a light switched off. He ended the call too fast. Who dat? She tried to keep her tone neutral, but suspicion had already slipped into the room. Work. He did not look at her when he answered. Since when work make you smile so? He dropped his keys on the table. Every question you go ask now? Michan talk pon phone again? I just ask. And me answer. He walked past her toward the bathroom. The smell of unfamiliar perfume drifted behind him, faint but distinct enough to stop her breath. It was not hers, not anything she owned, not anything that belonged in their house. She sat very still, staring at the doorway after he disappeared, while a cold understanding began settling deep inside her. That night, she could not eat much. Dwayne swallowed his soup without comment and spent most of the evening on his phone, typing with the speed of a man too absorbed to pretend otherwise. Once or twice, she caught him smiling down at the screen. Once, he even chuckled under his breath. Marcia turned her face away before he could notice the tears gathering again. In the days that followed, the pattern sharpened. Dwayne stayed out later. He became more particular about his clothes. He started wearing cologne even on weekends. Calls came at odd times, and when Marcia entered the room, he would lower his voice or step outside. The little tenderness he had left for her dried up almost completely, replaced by irritation that seemed to flare at the sight of her simply existing within reach. It was not just that he was cheating. It was that he was beginning to behave as though her presence blocked him from the life he preferred. One Friday afternoon, after a difficult morning at the clinic, Marcia returned home with a paper bag of medication and a body that felt ready to fold in on itself. The taxi ride from the medical center to Molynes Road had been long and hot. Traffic stalled near Halfway Tree. By the time she reached the gate, sweat had dampened her blouse and pain throbbed behind her eyes. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Dwayne had said he would be working late. She moved through the living room and into the kitchen, set down the medication, and noticed 2 wine glasses in the sink. For a long second, she simply stared. They did not own company wine glasses, not the kind sitting there, thin-rimmed and elegant, with traces of dark lipstick on one. Her pulse picked up. She looked around the kitchen as if the room itself might explain. On the counter sat a paper bag from a restaurant neither of them could usually justify spending on. In the bin, tucked beneath some foil, she saw the corner of a bakery box from an uptown pastry shop. He had brought another woman into her house. The certainty came so clean and cruel that she nearly laughed from shock. Marcia lowered herself into a chair because her legs had gone weak in a new way, not from illness this time, but from insult. She stared at the sink until the edges of her vision blurred. Memory and reality collided in her so hard she felt physically winded. This was the kitchen where she used to stand over curry goat on Sundays while Dwayne stole pieces and teased her. This was the room where they had once danced while waiting on dumplings to boil, because the radio played one of their songs. This was the counter where he had once kissed flour from her cheek and told her no matter what happened, them two would always hold strain together. And now a stranger's lipstick stood drying in her sink. When Dwayne came home that night, she was waiting in the living room, medication papers still folded on the side table, the wine glasses washed and set upside down like evidence he did not know she had chosen to preserve in her mind. He opened the door, glanced at her, and immediately looked away. That alone told her enough. "You had company here?" He loosened his tie. "Were you talking about?" She watched him carefully. 2 wine glass in a de sink. Food on the counter, Lipstick mark. You had company here? His shoulders stiffened, then relaxed in a gesture so calculated it almost impressed her. A brethren passed through? With lipstick? His eyes flashed. You're searching for a problem now? So you occupy yourself when me out working? Marcia felt something old and fierce stir beneath the weakness. Don't do that to me, Dwayne. Don't stand up in front of me and lie to me in my face in my own house. Your house? The way he said it made the room suddenly dangerous. Their eyes locked. She saw then that he was beyond shame. A man ashamed might avoid a woman's gaze. Dwayne held hers with challenge, with annoyance, with the arrogance of someone already halfway gone. Our house, then, she said quietly. The house me build with you, the house me keep, while you're out chasing whatever life you feel you deserve. He exhaled hard and threw his keys onto a side table. Listen good, Marcia. Me tired of DI accusations. Me tired of die sickness. Me tired of die long face every day. Me come home and all me get is stress. Stress. She repeated the word softly, almost to herself, because the cruelty of it was too enormous to meet directly. She had come from a clinic appointment where a doctor warned her that her latest blood work was troubling, that they needed to be aggressive, that she needed rest and monitoring and consistency. Her body was fighting a battle she did not fully understand. Yet somehow, in Dwayne's mind, he was the suffering one. That night, he slept, facing away from her. Or at least he pretended to sleep. She lay awake beside him, listening to the traffic fading outside, the occasional bark of a dog, the hum of a distant television through a neighbor's wall, and the breathing of the man whose back formed a border she was no longer permitted to cross. Around 2 in the morning, she heard his phone vibrate on the bedside table. He snatched it up so quickly he nearly knocked over the lamp. In the blue glow of the screen, she saw his face soften, with the same private warmth that had disappeared from their marriage. He got out of bed and stepped into the hallway to answer. Marcia closed her eyes. The humiliation was no longer a suspicion. It had become atmosphere. It lived in the house with them now. Over the next week, people on Molynes Road began noticing the changes, even if they could not name them. Miss Gloria next door, a woman who swept her yard with the discipline of a soldier and watched the world with sharp old eyes, saw Dwayne's car parked outside at strange hours, and once glimpsed a figure in the passenger seat too polished to belong to any work errand. Devon from the shop on the corner noticed Dwayne buying expensive liquor on a Tuesday evening and joking into his phone like a man feeling young again. A schoolgirl who passed the Bennett gate every afternoon saw Marcia sitting on the veranda one day, staring out with the stillness of somebody listening to bad news from inside her own head. Nobody knew the full story yet, but in Kingston, stories do not need full facts to begin moving. Marcia herself grew quieter. She stopped trying to ask questions when Dwayne came home late. She stopped mentioning his phone. She stopped explaining how she felt unless she absolutely had to. In part, it was self-protection. In part, it was survival. Every confrontation left her drained for hours. Some nights, after even brief tension, her heart would race so hard she feared it might simply give up. She learned to conserve energy the way poor people conserve electricity when the bill too high. But silence did not bring peace. It only gave Dwayne more room to become openly indifferent. One Sunday morning, church bells from farther down the way drifted across the neighborhood. Marcia used to love Sundays. She used to press her clothes on Saturday nights, line up her shoes, and hum hymns in the kitchen while breakfast cooked. Now she sat in bed while the sound floated in through the window and thought about the woman she used to be. Dwayne was getting ready in the bathroom. Not for church, for somewhere else. He had on a fitted shirt she bought him 2 Christmases ago and was taking unusual care with his hair. You going somewhere? He looked at her through the mirror. Out. Out where? With friends. She almost smiled at the laziness of the lie. Friends start wear perfume now too? He turned then, annoyance blazing. You can't help yourself, eh? Every minute investigation. No, she said, her voice thin but steady. Every minute me a realize the man me marry done leave long time and just never move out yet. The words hung between them. For the first time in a long while, he seemed startled. Not guilty, just irritated that she had found language sharp enough to pierce him. He snatched up his keys. Believe what you want. When the door slammed behind him, Marcia sat there, shaking from the effort of that small act of defiance. Yet beneath the tremor, something else flickered. A terrible kind of clarity. Not strength exactly. She did not have much strength left. But clarity can feel like strength when confusion has starved you long enough. That afternoon, while trying to sort laundry, she found a receipt in the pocket of one of Dwayne's trousers. It was from a restaurant in New Kingston, one of those places with dim lighting and prices that announced themselves before the food arrived. 2 entrees, 2 cocktails, dessert for 2. The date was from the week before, a night he had told her he was stuck at work. She sat on the bed, holding the receipt, while a silence heavier than tears spread through her. Evidence changes grief. Suspicion still leaves room for denial to bargain. Proof nails sorrow into place. She did not scream. She did not call him. She did not throw anything. She folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into her Bible. That evening, she called her older cousin, Pauline, in Portmore, not because she was ready to tell everything, but because hearing a voice that belonged to her side of life felt necessary. Pauline answered on the second ring with her usual directness and concern, and within minutes, Marcia had to fight not to break down. "How you doing, cuz?" "Me all right." "No," Pauline said softly after a pause. "You're not all right. Me know your voice." Marcia looked toward the kitchen where the clock ticked too loudly. For a moment, she thought she might confess it all. The sickness, the cruelty, the suspicion, the loneliness. But shame held her back. It is a strange thing how betrayal can embarrass the betrayed more than the betrayer. "Me just tired," she said. Pauline sighed. "Me can come check 'pon you next week if you want. We'll see." After they hung up, Marcia sat for a long time with the phone in her lap, wondering at what point suffering turns a woman into somebody who starts hiding from the people who love her because she no longer knows how to explain what has become of her life. Late that night, Dwayne returned with the smell of alcohol on him and a brightness in his face that vanished the second he saw her still awake. "You're not sleeping?" "Couldn't." He shrugged and began unbuttoning his shirt. "Then maybe stop thinking so much." She looked at him with such still pain that for a second even he seemed uncomfortable. But the feeling passed quickly. Men like Dwayne did not stay uncomfortable long if comfort required conscience. The next morning brought rain. Thick, steady rain that darkened the yard, pounded zinc roofs, and turned the light in the house grey. Marcia loved rain once. Not anymore. Rain made sickness feel more intimate, more claustrophobic. It made every ache seem amplified. She was trying to make tea when a sharp pain hit her so hard she gasped aloud and bent over the counter. The cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. She stood frozen, breathing in little broken pulls, while heat and nausea raced through her at once. Dwayne, who had been in the living room, stormed in at the sound. "What now?" The words came before concern, and that told its own story. She could barely answer. Pain. He looked from her to the shattered cup to the spreading tea. His face hardened with something dangerously close to disgust. "Marcia, me can't do this every day." She looked up, stunned. "I need help, and me need peace." The shout filled the kitchen and bounced off tile and cupboard wood. Rain hammered outside. For one suspended second, it felt as though even the weather had gone still to listen. He raked a hand through his hair and paced once, furious in the selfish, exhausted way of a man who believes somebody else's suffering was engineered specifically to inconvenience him. Whole life mash up. Everyday doctor, everyday medication, everyday some breakdown. Me done. Hear me? Me done. Marcia's mouth parted, but no words came. She had known he was slipping, known he was straying, known he resented her. But hearing the raw impatience in his voice while she stood doubled over in visible pain, stripped away the last soft, lying corner of hope. Somewhere deep inside herself, past grief and shock and illness, she understood this truth with cold precision. If she got worse, Dwayne would not protect her. He might not even stay. The thought should have shattered her completely. Instead, it left her numb. He grabbed a rag, tossed it toward the broken cup, and walked out of the kitchen muttering under his breath. She stayed where she was until the worst of the pain passed, then lowered herself slowly, painfully, and began gathering the shards one by one. Her hands trembled so badly that one piece nicked her finger. Bright blood welled at once. She stared at it stupidly for a moment. Then she laughed. It was a terrible laugh, small and hollow and nothing like joy. But it escaped anyway, because there was something almost absurd in the fact that her life had become so stripped of tenderness that even bleeding in her own kitchen happened in silence. That same evening, she took out an old photo album from the wardrobe. She had not opened it in years. There they were, on their wedding day, young and glowing and foolish enough to believe promises spoken before God automatically made a man dependable. There was one picture of them in the early days of the Molynes Road house, standing in front of the gate with paint stains on their clothes and huge smiles on their faces. Another of them at Hellshire, hair blown wild by sea breeze, him carrying her sandals in one hand and holding her waist with the other. Marcia traced the edge of one picture with a fingertip and tried to locate the exact moment the man in those photographs began disappearing. Was it gradual? Was it always there? Had love blinded her to a selfishness that only hardship could expose? Or had he simply become weaker than she had ever imagined when asked to sacrifice comfort for loyalty? She did not know. What she did know was that something was approaching. She felt it, the way old people feel weather in their knees. The house was no longer just unhappy. It was preparing for an impact. 2 days later, the impact took a visible form. Dwayne came home earlier than usual, and with him came a scent that entered the room before the truth did. Floral, sweet, expensive. Marcia was sitting in the living room, wrapped in a light blanket despite the heat. Reading over medication instructions she could barely concentrate on. When she heard laughter outside the gate, female laughter, bright and unbothered, every muscle in her body went still. A car door slammed. Footsteps. Then Dwayne entered alone, but not quickly enough to hide the fact that somebody was with him just outside. Marcia rose too fast, dizziness sweeping in immediately. Who outside? Nobody. Dwayne, who outside? He looked irritated, then defiant. Somebody me know, somebody me know. The carelessness of the phrase hit her like a slap. Before she could speak again, a woman's voice floated from the veranda. Babe, you're coming? Silence detonated in the room. Marcia's fingers tightened around the back of the chair beside her. She did not blink. She did not breathe properly. The world seemed to narrow to that one reckless word hanging in the air. Babe. Dwayne did not look ashamed. He looked inconvenienced. Move, Marcia, he said. Me coming back inside in a minute? She stared at him as if he had grown another face. You bring she here? He kissed his teeth. Don't start. You bring she to my gate? To my house? Pon Molynes Road, where everybody can see? His expression turned hard. Me say, don't start. But the woman outside had already shifted the balance of the neighborhood. Curtains moved. Miss Gloria's gate creaked. Somewhere farther down, a child called out. On a road where people measured respect by what could be publicly hidden, Dwayne had crossed into pure insult. Marcia moved past him before her body could object and stepped onto the veranda. The woman standing by the gate was younger than Marcia had imagined, though not by much. She was dressed neat and fitted, face well done, hair laid sleek, confidence rising off her like steam. She did not look embarrassed. She looked curious, almost amused, as if she had been hearing stories about Marcia and had finally come to see the weak wife for herself. For one long second, the two women looked at each other in the wet evening light. Marcia saw the manicure, the polished sandals, the expensive handbag. She saw health, ease, appetite. She saw a woman who had not spent the past months negotiating with pain before brushing her teeth. And the younger woman saw exactly what Dwayne had allowed her to see. A sick wife in a blanket, pale-faced, trembling, trying to stand straight in a body that kept betraying her. The humiliation was so complete, it almost became clarity. The woman smiled slightly. Evening. Marcia did not answer. Behind her, Dwayne's voice came low and sharp. Go inside. She turned slowly. The rage in her was quiet, which made it more dangerous than if she had shouted. One day, she said, and even to herself, her voice sounded strange, thin but edged with steel. One day, Yohago, remember dis. He laughed once, dismissive. Go rest, Marcia. Rest. As if that was all this was. As if rest was what a sick, betrayed woman needed in the face of open disrespect. As if the house on Molynes Road had not just witnessed the first public crack of the disaster about to split it in two. She went back inside because her legs could not hold much more, not because she accepted defeat. She sat down in the same chair and listened as Dwayne murmured outside with the woman for several more minutes before driving off again. When the gate finally clicked shut and quiet settled over the yard, Marcia sat alone in the gathering dark with tears she refused to release. Not because she had no sorrow left, but because something was changing inside her. Grief was still there, pain was still there, illness still gripped her body like a fist. Yet beneath it all, a harder understanding was forming. Dwayne no longer loved her enough to protect her dignity, and whatever came next, she would have to face it with almost no one beside her. Still, she did not know the full scale of what was coming. She did not know that somewhere far beyond Jamaica, lawyers were moving papers bearing her family name. She did not know that properties in Beverly Hills, Red Hills, and Cherry Gardens would soon be tied to her future. She did not know that international offices across the Caribbean carried a legacy meant to land in her hands. On Molynes Road that night, all she knew was the ache in her body, the shame in her house, and the terrifying possibility that the man she had built her life with was preparing to throw her away when she was weakest. The rain started again after midnight, soft at first, then heavier. Marcia lay awake, listening to it strike the roof, while Dwayne still had not come home. In that dark, with fever warming her skin and thunder muttering somewhere over Kingston, she pressed one hand over her chest and whispered the only thing she could still ask with honesty. Lord, if my life mash up, don't let me mash up with it. Outside, Molynes Road carried on as it always did, swallowing secrets, echoing pain, watching people rise and fall. But in the Bennett house, the first true chapter of reckoning had begun, and before long, the same woman being dishonored in a small bedroom in Kingston would become the last person Dwayne Bennett would ever wish he had underestimated. The day his mistress sat comfortably in the same space his sick wife once called home, Molynes Road did not just watch, it judged. By the time the sun rose over Kingston that morning, word had already begun slipping through the cracks of the neighborhood. It didn't travel loudly at first. It never did. It moved quietly, through glances, through pauses in conversation, through the way people leaned a little closer when speaking low at gates and corner shops. Something was wrong at the Bennett house. Something serious. Inside, Marcia had not slept. Not properly. Her body had shut down in pieces throughout the night, drifting into short, restless spells before jerking awake again with the same heavy feeling pressing down on her chest. The image of the woman at the gate replayed over and over in her mind. The confidence, the ease, the disrespect wrapped neatly in a smile. But worse than the woman was Dwayne. The way he stood there, the way he spoke, the way he did not defend her. That was the part that kept her awake. Morning light crept into the room slowly, touching the walls like it didn't want to disturb anything. Marcia lay still, staring at the ceiling, her body aching in familiar ways, but her spirit carrying a new kind of pain. One that didn't come from sickness, but from knowing something had shifted permanently. This was no longer a marriage in trouble. This was a marriage being replaced. Outside, Molynes Road was already alive. Cars passed, vendors called. Life continued, but inside that house, everything felt like it was waiting for something worse. It came sooner than she expected. Dwayne didn't return home until mid-morning. Not quietly either. The gate opened. Voices followed. A woman's voice. Bright, carefree, comfortable. Marcia sat up slowly, her body resisting the movement, but something deeper, pushing her forward. Her heart began to race, not from illness this time, but from instinct. He brought her back. Before she could even stand fully, the front door opened. And this time, Dwayne did not enter alone. Shanice walked in like she belonged there, not hesitant, not ashamed. She stepped into the living room, eyes scanning the space with quiet curiosity, like someone evaluating a place she was already imagining herself in. Marcia froze. Time slowed into something thick and suffocating. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Dwayne broke it. "Sit down," he said casually to Shanice, gesturing toward the couch Marcia had picked out years ago, not even looking at his wife, not even acknowledging her presence properly. Shanice sat, crossed her legs, and smiled faintly. Marcia felt her stomach turn. Dwayne, her voice came out softer than she intended. He sighed like her voice alone annoyed him. What now? That question, that simple, careless question. It hit harder than anything he had said before. What is this? She asked, her eyes moving between him and the woman now seated comfortably in her home. Dwayne leaned against the wall, arms folded. This is me living my life. Silence. Heavy silence. Marcia looked at Shanice, then back at Dwayne. In my house? His expression changed slightly, just enough to show irritation, sharpening into something more aggressive. Stop say your house, like you own it alone. Her chest tightened. I built this with you, and now you can't maintain it, he snapped. The words cut deep, not because they were loud, but because they were true in a way he had twisted into cruelty. Her sickness had slowed her, weakened her, but instead of standing beside her, he used it against her. Shanice shifted slightly on the couch, watching the exchange like it was something mildly entertaining. That was when Marcia realized something that made the situation even worse. This woman knew. She knew Marcia was sick. She knew this was her home. And she still sat there, comfortable, smiling. You're not even ashamed? Marcia asked quietly, looking directly at Shanice. Shanice raised an eyebrow slightly. Fie, what? The boldness of the response sent a ripple through the room. For coming into another woman's house like this, Marcia said, her voice shaking slightly but holding its ground. Shanice leaned back, completely unfazed. If him never want me here, me wouldn't be here. And just like that, the responsibility shifted. Not to her, back to him, where it belonged. Marcia turned slowly to Dwayne. You bring her here? Yes. No hesitation, no shame, just yes. The final piece. Something inside Marcia broke quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically, just ended. Because sometimes the deepest pain doesn't scream. It goes silent. Dwayne pushed himself off the wall and walked closer. Listen good, he said, his tone lowering but becoming more serious. Me tired of pretending. Me tired of coming home to sickness and stress. Me want better fee myself. Marcia stared at him. Better. That was what he called it. Replacing her, discarding her, humiliating her. Better, she whispered. Yes, he said firmly. Better. Her hands trembled at her sides. And me? He paused, only for a second, then said the words that would echo in her mind long after this day was over. You need help, and Mishan give you that no more. The room fell into a deep, suffocating silence. Because beneath those words was the truth. He wasn't just leaving emotionally. He was preparing to remove her completely. Marcia felt it. The shift. The decision already made. The end already written. And Shanice? She just watched. Because in her mind, the position was already hers. Outside, a car slowed slightly as it passed the house. Someone watching. Someone noticing. Molynes Road was paying attention now. And what it was seeing was the beginning of something nobody would forget. Marcia took a slow breath, steadying herself. Her body was weak, but something deeper inside her was starting to wake up. Not strength, not yet, but awareness. This was not just betrayal. This was displacement. And if she didn't understand that now, she would lose everything before she even realized it was happening. Dwayne walked past her toward the kitchen like the conversation was already over. Come, he said to Shanice casually, make yourself comfortable. Make yourself comfortable. In her house, in her life, in her place. Marcia stood there, unmoving, as the sound of their voices drifted into the kitchen. Laughter followed. Light. Carefree, like nothing had just happened. And that was the moment she understood something clearly. They were not waiting for her to leave. They expected her to accept it. And if she didn't, they would force the outcome anyway. Her fingers curled slowly into her palm. Not in anger, but in realization. Because sometimes the beginning of a woman's rise starts the exact moment people think she has fallen completely. And on Molynes Road, that morning, everyone believed Marcia Bennett had already lost. They had no idea. This was only the beginning. The night he finally told his sick wife to leave the house, thunder rolled over Kingston like it came to witness the moment, because even the sky seemed to understand that something wicked was about to happen. By the time darkness settled over Molynes Road, the tension inside the Bennett house had thickened into something almost physical. It could be felt in the walls, in the silence, in the way even the fan seemed to turn slower, like it was tired of carrying the weight of everything happening inside. Marcia had not moved much since morning, not because she didn't want to, but because everything inside her felt drained. Her body was weak, yes, but this was different. This was the kind of exhaustion that comes when your heart has been hit too many times in one day. The image of Shanice sitting in her living room replayed over and over in her mind. The way Dwayne spoke, the way he stood, the way he chose her, openly. There was no more confusion, no more guessing, no more hoping. The truth had stepped into the house and sat down comfortably. And now, it refused to leave. Outside, the rain started slowly, soft at first, then steady, then heavy. Molynes Road began to glisten under streetlights, water running along the edges of the road, carrying dirt, leaves, and whatever else the day had left behind. Inside the house, Marcia sat in the dark living room, a small lamp glowing beside her. She didn't turn on the main light. She didn't want brightness. Not tonight. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers loosely interlocked, as if holding herself together required physical effort. Her breathing was slow, measured, careful, because even breathing too fast sometimes brought pain now. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, each second dragging, each moment stretching, until finally the gate opened. Her heart reacted instantly, not with hope, but with preparation. Dwayne was back, and he wasn't alone. Again. Laughter echoed faintly from outside before the door even opened. That same carefree tone, that same disrespect wrapped in comfort. The door pushed open, and there they were, Dwayne and Shanice, wet from the rain, laughing, alive in a way Marcia had not felt in months. They stopped slightly when they saw her sitting there, but only slightly, because whatever boundary once existed was gone now. Dwayne walked in first, shaking rain from his shoulders. "Why you sitting in a dark?" he asked, more annoyed than concerned. Marcia didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, then at her, then back at him. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, but not for him, for her, because she was still the only one in that room holding on to what the situation should have meant. "You going to keep bringing her here?" she finally asked. Her voice was calm, too calm. Dwayne exhaled slowly, like he was tired of repeating himself. "Yes, just like that. No apology, no explanation, just yes." The word landed heavier than any shout could have. Marcia nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in understanding. "So that's it then," she said quietly. Dwayne looked at her, slightly confused by her tone. "What you mean?" That's it, she repeated. You done choose. He shrugged. I choose happiness. The statement echoed in the room. Happiness. As if she had been the opposite of that. As if her sickness erased every sacrifice, every moment, every year. Shanice leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching. Still silent, still observing, still very much present. Marcia looked at her again, really looked this time, and for the first time, she didn't feel anger. She felt something else. Clarity, because this woman wasn't the cause, she was the result. The result of a man who lacked loyalty. The result of a heart that could not withstand pressure. The result of a decision already made long before she ever stepped into the picture. Marcia slowly pushed herself up from the chair. Her body protested immediately. Pain shot through her side. Her knees weakened, but she stood anyway. Not for him, not for her, for herself. You want me gone? She asked. The question hung in the air like something fragile. Dwayne hesitated, just for a second, because saying it out loud made it real. But then he said it. Yes. Shanice didn't move, didn't react, because in her mind, that answer was expected. Marcia felt something shift deep inside her chest. Not break, not shatter, shift. Because there's a difference. Breaking leaves pieces, shifting changes direction. When? She asked. Dwayne rubbed his face, irritated now that things were becoming practical. Soon. How soon? Marcia, he started, frustration creeping in. Me can't keep doing this. Me need space. Me need peace. You need somewhere else for go. Somewhere else. The words echoed, as if a sick woman could just stand up and relocate her life overnight. As if she hadn't built everything inside these walls. As if she wasn't barely able to stand for long periods. And if me don't leave, she asked. The question changed the room. Dwayne's expression hardened. Then his voice dropped. You will. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Because now, it wasn't just a conversation, it was a warning. Outside, thunder cracked loudly across the sky. Rain intensified. The house felt smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves were closing in on the moment. Marcia's heart beat faster, but her face remained still, because in that moment, fear and dignity were fighting inside her, and dignity refused to step aside. You would really put me out like this? She asked quietly. Dwayne didn't answer immediately, but when he did, his words carried no softness. I already did. The truth of it hit hard, because emotionally, he had already removed her. This was just the physical part catching up. Marcia nodded slowly, then turned, and walked toward the bedroom. Each step was slow, measured, painful, but controlled, because if she broke down now, they would win completely. Inside the bedroom, she closed the door softly behind her, and for the first time since everything started, she let herself cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. From a place that had been holding too much for too long. Tears fell quietly as she looked around the room, the bed she shared, the wardrobe she organized, the mirror that once reflected a stronger version of herself. Everything felt like it belonged to a different life now, a life that was ending, whether she was ready or not. Outside, their voices continued, laughter again, movement, life going on, without her. After a while, the tears slowed, not because the pain left, but because something else began to rise. A quiet resolve, not strong yet, but present. She wiped her face slowly, looked at herself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't see just weakness. She saw someone who had survived this far, someone who was still standing, someone who, despite everything, was not finished yet. Outside, thunder rolled again, and somewhere deep in Kingston that night, a shift had begun. Not just in that house, but in her life, because the night a woman loses everything is often the same night her real story begins. And Marcia Bennett's story was far from over. The morning she collapsed with nowhere left to go was the same morning destiny finally knocked. But not gently, not kindly, and not in any way she expected. By the time the sun rose over Kingston, Marcia Bennett was no longer a wife. She was no longer a partner. She was no longer even a resident of the house she had built her life in. She was outside. The rain from the night before had not fully stopped. It had settled into a slow, cold drizzle that clung to everything: roads, fences, rooftops, and now her skin. Molynes Road was waking up. Cars splashed through shallow water. Vendors began setting up again. Voices rose. Life moved forward. But Marcia stood still, just beyond the gate, one small bag in her hand, her body weak, her chest tight, her eyes swollen from a night that had broken something inside her in ways she could not even name yet. It had happened just before dawn, not loudly, not dramatically, but finally. Dwayne had stood in the doorway of the bedroom while she slowly packed what little she could manage, his arms folded, his patience already gone, before the moment even began. "Make it quick," he had said. No emotion, no hesitation, just instruction. Marcia had not begged, not because she didn't feel like it, but because something inside her refused to give him that satisfaction. Even in her weakest state, she held on to that one piece of dignity. She moved slowly. Each item she touched carried memory. Clothes she wore when life was better, a photo tucked into a drawer, a Bible resting quietly beside the bed. She paused when she picked that up. Her fingers lingered on it because it felt like the only thing in that room that still recognized her. Behind her, Dwayne shifted impatiently. "You done yet?" She didn't answer. She just closed the bag, lifted it, and turned toward the door. That walk, from the bedroom, through the living room, to the front door, felt longer than any journey she had ever taken. Because every step was a goodbye, not just to the house, but to the life she thought she had. Shanice sat on the couch, watching, silent, observing like someone witnessing the final scene of something she had already replaced. Marcia didn't look at her this time. She didn't give her that moment, because this was no longer about her. This was about him. At the door, she paused, just for a second, then turned slightly, not fully, just enough, and said quietly, "You will remember this day." Dwayne laughed softly, dismissive, arrogant. "I doubt that." And with that, he closed the door, on her, on everything, on the woman who had once been his foundation. The sound of the latch clicking into place echoed louder than it should have, because sometimes the smallest sounds mark the biggest endings. Now she stood outside, on Molynes Road, where people were beginning to notice. Miss Gloria paused mid-sweep. A young boy slowed his walk. A taxi driver glanced twice. Because even in a place where people mind their business, there are moments too loud to ignore. Marcia lowered her head slightly, not in shame, but in exhaustion. She had nowhere to go, not immediately. Her body was already struggling, and now her entire life had been removed from under her feet. She took a step forward, then another, each one heavier than the last. The bag in her hand felt like it weighed more than it should. Her breathing became uneven. Pain pressed against her ribs again. But she kept moving, because standing still meant collapsing. And collapsing meant she didn't even want to think about it. The drizzle turned slightly heavier. Water soaked into her clothes. Her hair clung to her face. Her vision blurred slightly, not just from rain, but from weakness. She reached the corner, and that was when her body gave its warning. Sharp, sudden, unforgiving. Her knees buckled. Her hand reached out for something, anything to hold. But there was nothing. The world tilted. Sound faded. And just before everything went dark, she heard a voice. Miss, hold on. Then nothing. Darkness. Silence. Stillness. When she opened her eyes again, the world had changed. Not completely, but enough. The first thing she noticed was the ceiling. White. Clean. Still. Then the smell. Antiseptic. Soft. Safe. She blinked slowly. Her body felt heavy, but not as chaotic. There was a strange calm around her. Easy. A voice. Gentle. Older. She turned her head slightly. A nurse stood beside her. Kind eyes. Steady hands. You fainted on the road, the nurse said softly. We brought you in. Marcia tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. Her lips barely moved. Where? Small clinic, the nurse answered. You're safe. Safe. The word felt unfamiliar, but comforting. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't being judged. She wasn't being rushed. She wasn't being pushed aside. She was cared for. Tears filled her eyes again. Not from pain this time, but from relief. Because sometimes the smallest kindness feels like salvation. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt different there, slower, softer. A doctor came, asked questions, checked her vitals, spoke in careful tones. There were concerns, serious ones, but for now, she was stable, and that was enough. She drifted in and out of sleep, her body finally allowing itself to rest after days, weeks of strain. And then, sometime later, a different presence entered the room, not medical, not familiar, different. She opened her eyes slowly and saw him. A man in a suit, clean, precise, out of place in a small Kingston clinic. He stood near the door at first, watching her carefully, then stepped forward. Are you Marcia Bennett? Her heart skipped. Yes. He nodded once. Professional, measured. My name is Daniel Reeves. I represent an estate based overseas. She frowned slightly, her mind still foggy. I think you have the wrong person. He stepped closer, placed a folder gently on the table beside her, opened it, turned it toward her. No, he said calmly, we've been looking for you. Her eyes moved slowly over the documents. Names, legal text, signatures, then one line. That made everything stop. Her name, attached to something she could not immediately understand. You are listed as the sole beneficiary of the Bennett estate, he continued. Her breathing changed. What? Estate? He held her gaze, steady, clear. An international holding group valued at approximately $900 million US. Silence. Complete. Absolute. Even the air in the room felt like it paused. Marcia stared at him, then at the paper, then back at him. Because nothing about that moment made sense. Not after everything she had just gone through. Not after being thrown out. Not after collapsing in the street. Not after losing everything. $900 million? Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Because some shocks are too big for immediate reaction. They don't explode. They settle, slowly, deeply, changing everything they touch. You inherited multiple properties, he continued calmly, including residences in Beverly Hills, 2 estates in Red Hills, and 1 in Cherry Gardens. Her heart pounded, loud now, uncontrolled, and business operations across the Caribbean, he added, all under your name. Her world shifted completely because the woman who was just thrown out onto Molynes Road with nowhere to go now owned more than she could even comprehend. Tears slipped from her eyes, not from sadness, not from joy, but from the overwhelming collision of both, because life had just turned in a way so sharp it almost didn't feel real. And somewhere back on Molynes Road, the man who thought he had removed a burden had no idea he had just thrown away everything. The day she returned to Molynes Road was the same day regret found the man who once threw her away. And this time, it did not knock politely. It broke down everything he thought he controlled. Weeks had passed. But for Dwayne, time had not moved the way he expected. At first, everything felt like freedom. The house was quieter, no slow footsteps, no medicine bottles on the table, no reminders of weakness, just space. And Shanice. Laughter filled the rooms again. Music played louder. Lights stayed on later into the night. It felt like a new beginning. At least, that's what he told himself. But something strange started happening. Peace never fully settled, because peace built on betrayal never sits comfortably. Bills started stacking, not immediately noticeable, but gradually. Little things, then bigger things, opportunities he once had, began slipping. Calls stopped coming. Connections grew distant. People who used to respect him now spoke to him differently, like something had shifted, like something unseen had changed his position in the world. And Shanice? She started noticing too. At first she ignored it, then she questioned it, then she complained, because the version of Dwayne she wanted was not this one, not the struggling one, not the declining one, not the one losing control. You said things different, she told him one evening, her voice sharp, her patience thin. Dwayne rubbed his forehead. Things just tight right now. How tight? She asked. He didn't answer, because he didn't know how to. Because the truth was, he had made a decision based on emotion, and now reality was asking him to pay for it. Meanwhile, Marsha's world had transformed in ways that still felt unreal even to her. The clinic was only the beginning. Within days of that meeting, everything accelerated. The man in the suit, Daniel Reeves, had not exaggerated. He had understated. The Bennett estate was massive, global, structured, powerful, and now it was hers. At first, she struggled to process it, because how does a woman go from being thrown out on the street to being the owner of an empire? Her mind could not bridge the gap. Her emotions couldn't catch up. But reality did not wait for understanding. Arrangements were made quickly. Doctors were brought in, specialists, private care. Her condition began to stabilize under proper treatment. Not instantly, but noticeably. Her strength slowly returned, bit by bit, day by day, and with it, something else returned too. Her presence, her posture changed. Her voice grew steadier. Her eyes no longer carried just pain. They carried awareness, because now she knew something she didn't know before. She was never as small as her situation made her feel. She had always been more. She just didn't have the space to see it. The properties were real. Beverly Hills, Red Hills, Cherry Gardens, names she had heard before, but never imagined being connected to. Now they belonged to her. The company, even bigger. Operations across the Caribbean. Employees, executives, decisions waiting for her. At first, she was overwhelmed, but she listened. She learned. She observed, because strength does not always arrive loud. Sometimes it builds quietly, until one day it becomes undeniable. And then, one morning, she made a decision. Not emotional, not impulsive, clear. She was going back. Not to beg, not to fight, but to close a chapter properly. Back on Molynes Road, nothing looked different. Same houses, same gates, same people, but energy travels faster than change, and whispers had already started. People had seen things online, heard things on the news, a Jamaican woman, a massive inheritance, international business. The name, Bennett. Some recognized it, some didn't, but curiosity was rising. Then it happened. A convoy of black luxury vehicles turned onto Molynes Road. Slow, controlled, powerful. People stopped what they were doing. Heads turned, phones came out. Because this was not normal. The vehicles moved carefully until they stopped. Right in front of the Bennett house. Silence spread quickly, the kind that carries expectation. Doors opened, one by one, and then she stepped out. Marcia. But not the Marcia they remembered, not the weak woman, not the one in pain. This version stood differently, dressed in quiet elegance, strong, composed, unshaken. Even the air around her felt different, like she no longer belonged to the limitations of that street, but chose to stand there anyway. Miss Gloria dropped her broom slightly. The young boy, who once watched her leave, now stared in disbelief, because everyone understood one thing immediately. Something had changed. Inside the house, Dwayne heard the commotion, stepped outside, and froze. Because standing at the gate was the woman he threw away. But she didn't look like someone who lost anything. His heart skipped, not from love, from realization. Marcia. The name left his mouth slowly, carefully, like he wasn't sure he had the right to say it anymore. She didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him, not with anger, not with sadness, but with something far more powerful, detachment. Because when someone hurts you deeply, the opposite of love is not hate, it's distance. He stepped closer, confused, uncomfortable, unsure. What is all this? She let a small pause sit between them, long enough for him to feel it. Then she spoke, calm, clear. I came to close this part of my life. The words hit him harder than he expected, because there was no emotion in them, no desperation, no attachment. And that scared him more than anything else. Behind him, Shanice appeared at the doorway. Her expression changed instantly, because she could see it too. This was not the same woman, not even close. Dwayne swallowed. You look different. Marcia almost smiled. Because I am. Silence. Heavy, real. He looked at the vehicles, the people around, the shift in energy. And slowly, the truth began forming in his mind. What happened? She met his eyes and said simply, my life continued. That was all. No explanation, no detail, just truth. Because sometimes, the less you say, the louder it hits. Dwayne's mind raced. Regret began creeping in, fast, uncontrolled, because now he was seeing what he lost. Not what he thought he lost, but what he actually lost. And the difference was devastating. "I didn't know," he started. She raised her hand slightly, and he stopped. "I know," she said calmly, and those two words carried everything. Because ignorance does not erase consequence. She stepped back slightly, signaling the end. "This is the last time I come here," she said, and for the first time, there was a slight emotion in her voice. Not pain, but closure. "You didn't lose me because I was weak," she continued, her voice steady, controlled. "You lost me because you couldn't recognize value until it was gone." Silence swallowed the street. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke, because everyone felt it. That moment, that truth, that reversal. Dwayne stood frozen, because there was nothing left to say, nothing that could fix it, nothing that could undo it. And that was the real punishment. Not losing her, but understanding too late who she really was. Marcia turned, walked toward the car, did not look back, because some chapters do not deserve a second glance. The door closed, the convoy moved, and just like that, she was gone, leaving behind silence, shock, and a man standing in the exact place where he once believed he had control, now realizing he had nothing. And somewhere far beyond Molynes Road, a new life was already waiting for the woman he never truly understood, a life he would never be part of again. The day the papers arrived with her name on everything he thought he owned was the day Dwayne Bennett had realized losing his wife was not his worst mistake. It was only the beginning of his downfall. Molynes Road had not been the same since Marcia returned. Even after the convoy disappeared, even after the dust settled, even after people went back to their normal routines, something remained. A shift. A story too powerful to stay quiet. Because Kingston, don't forget moments like that. And now, everybody was talking. At the shop, at the gate, on the phone. "You hear, says she rich now? Dem say millions, US dollars. Same woman where dem put out? Lord God." The whispers spread fast. Faster than Dwayne could control. Faster than he could explain. Faster than he could hide from. Inside the house, tension had replaced everything else. Shanice paced the living room, her arms folded tight. Her patience was gone. Her confusion had turned into anger. "You never tell me nothing about this," she snapped. Dwayne sat on the edge of the chair, restless, frustrated, and now nervous. "I didn't know." "You expect me to believe that?" Her voice cut sharp. "You expect me to believe, so you just throw out a woman we're rich like that and never know?" "I said I didn't know," he shouted back. But even as he said it, it sounded weak. Because now, it didn't matter what he knew. What mattered was what he lost. Shanice laughed bitterly. "Unbelievable." She shook her head slowly. "You're wicked. And you're foolish." The words hit harder than expected, because they were true. And truth always lands deeper than insult. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcia was no longer the woman Molynes Road remembered. She was sitting in a quiet office, overlooking Kingston from a height she had never experienced before. Red Hills, one of the estates now under her name. The view stretched far, houses below, roads winding, the city alive. But for the first time, She was not looking up at life. She was looking down on it. And that changes a person, not just externally, but internally. Daniel Reeves stood across from her, placing another set of documents on the table. "These are the final transfers," he said calmly. Her name appeared again, and again, and again. Properties, accounts, companies, power, everything, now tied to her. But Marcia wasn't smiling, not widely, not excitedly, because her transformation wasn't loud. It was controlled, measured, focused, because pain had taught her something wealth never could: value, not just of money, but of people, of loyalty, of character. And now, she understood something clearly. She didn't just inherit an empire, she inherited responsibility, an unfinished business. She looked up slowly. "Who owns the Molynes Road property?" Daniel paused, checked the file, then answered, "It falls under a small subsidiary recently absorbed into the estate." Her eyes sharpened slightly. "And now?" He met her gaze. "You do." Silence. Deep. Intentional. Because that one answer changed everything. Back on Molynes Road. The same gate. The same house. But the power had shifted. Completely. Dwayne didn't know yet. But it was coming. Not as revenge, but as consequence. Days later, a black vehicle pulled up again. Not a convoy this time, just one. Clean, quiet, purposeful. A man stepped out. Suit, folder in hand, knocked firmly on the gate. Dwayne opened the door, irritated already. "Yes," the man spoke calmly. "Mr. Dwayne Bennett?" "Yes. I'm here regarding this property." Dwayne frowned. "What about it?" The man opened the folder, pulled out documents, and handed them over. "You are being formally notified." Dwayne's eyes scanned the page, slowly, then faster, then again, because his brain was refusing to accept what it was reading. Transferred ownership, new title holder, vacate notice. His hands trembled slightly. This must be a mistake." The man remained calm. "It is not." Dwayne looked up. "What you mean it's not?" "The property is no longer under your control." Silence. Heavy. Unreal. "Who own it then?" he asked, his voice tightening. The man held his gaze. "Marcia Bennett." The world shifted again, but this time, not for her, for him, because the house he stood in, the house he used to feel powerful in, now belonged to the woman he threw out. Shanice stepped closer behind him. "What that mean?" she asked. Dwayne didn't answer, because he couldn't, because everything was collapsing too fast. "You are required to vacate within the stated period," the man continued, calm, professional, unemotional. Then he turned and left. Just like that. No argument, no negotiation, no control. The gate closed, and silence filled the space, thick, unforgiving. Shanice looked at him, then the paper, then back at him. "You serious right now?" He still didn't answer, because now he understood, fully, completely, painfully. This was not just loss. This was reversal. Everything he thought he had gained was being taken, and everything he threw away now stood above him. Shanice stepped back slowly. Her expression changed, from anger to realization, then to distance, because survival always reveals true intentions. "I can't stay here," she said quietly. Dwayne looked up. "What?" "I'm not going down with you," she said plainly. No emotion, no apology, just truth. The same way he had once spoken to Marcia. And just like that, history repeated. But this time, he was on the receiving end. She grabbed her things, walked to the door, paused only briefly, then left. No looking back, no second thought. And in that moment, Dwayne stood alone. In a house that was no longer his. In a life that was falling apart. With nothing left to hold on to, except regret. Deep, heavy, unavoidable regret. And somewhere above the city, Marcia stood by the window of her Red Hills estate, looking out, calm, collected, not celebrating, not seeking revenge, just moving forward, because her story was never about destroying him. It was about surviving him. And now, she had. But the question still remained. Was this truly the end? Or just the beginning of something even greater? The day the past came back for her empire was the day Marcia realized something terrifying. Surviving her husband was only the beginning, because not everyone was happy. She inherited everything. The night air in Red Hills felt different, cooler, quieter. But beneath that calm, something was shifting. Marcia stood by the large glass window overlooking Kingston once again, the city lights flickering like distant stars beneath her. From up here, everything looked peaceful, ordered, controlled. But she had learned something the hard way. Appearances lie, because just weeks ago, her life looked normal too. And now, everything had changed. She held a glass of water in her hand, untouched. Her reflection stared back at her, stronger, calmer, but not untouched. Never untouched, because pain doesn't disappear when life improves. It transforms. And sometimes, it prepares you for something bigger. Behind her, the door opened softly. Daniel stepped in. But this time, his energy was different. Less calm, more serious. She didn't turn immediately. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He paused, then spoke. "There's something you need to know." Her grip on the glass tightened slightly, because she recognized that tone. It was not informational. It was warning. She turned slowly. His face confirmed it. This was not about property, not about business, not about transition. This was something else. "Your grandfather's estate," he began. She listened closely. It didn't just include assets. A pause. And it included enemies. Silence. Deep. Cold. Because wealth, at that level, never comes clean. Her expression didn't change much, but inside, something shifted. "Explain." Daniel stepped forward, placed a file on the table, opened it. Photos, names, transactions, old disputes. "Your grandfather controlled major shipping routes across the Caribbean," he said. "And when he died, a lot of people expected those assets to fall into different hands." Her eyes scanned the pages, carefully. "People who lost money?" she asked. "People who lost power," he corrected. "That was worse, much worse, because money can be recovered. Power, people fight for, die for, kill for. And now, it's mine," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "And that makes you—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because she understood. A target. The room felt heavier now. The view outside, less peaceful, because danger changes perspective. "You're saying someone is coming?" Daniel didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't fear filling the space. It was preparation. Because Marcia Bennett was not the same woman who once cried quietly in a small room on Molynes Road. She had changed, not just because of money, but because of experience, pain, survival, and something else, awareness. If they think I'm weak, she said, slowly. Daniel looked at her. They will test that. She nodded once, then closed the file. Calm, controlled. Let them. That response surprised him slightly, but he didn't argue, because there was something in her now that wasn't there before, something steady, unshakable, but far away, in a different part of Kingston. Another story was unfolding. Dwayne sat on a small bench outside a building that was not his, a bag at his feet, a phone in his hand. But no one to call, because when you burn bridges, you don't always realize how alone you'll be after. His life had collapsed fast, too fast. The house was gone. Shanice was gone. Respect was gone. And now, reality had caught up. He stared at the screen, scrolled through contacts, paused on one name. Marcia. His thumb hovered, shaking slightly, because now he understood something clearly. She wasn't just his past. She was his biggest mistake. And maybe his only chance. He pressed call. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, then stopped. No answer. He exhaled slowly, closed his eyes, because deep down, he knew. Some doors don't reopen, but across the city, someone else was watching. Not emotionally, not regretfully, strategically. A black SUV sat parked in the shadows. Engine off, lights off. Silent. Inside, 2 men watched a photo. Marcia. One of them spoke. "That's her?" The other nodded. "She doesn't look like a threat." A pause, then a cold reply. Neither did her grandfather. Silence. Then the first man leaned back slightly. "So what's the move?" The second man's voice dropped, low, calculated. "We take everything back." Back in Red Hills, Marcia stood alone again, looking out over the city. But now, she wasn't just looking at life. She was stepping into something bigger, something deeper, something dangerous. Because her story was no longer just about survival. It was about power. And power always attracts conflict. Her phone buzzed softly beside her. She picked it up, looked at the missed call. Dwayne. She stared at the name for a moment, then placed the phone down, without responding. Because some chapters stay closed. But as she turned back to the window, a strange feeling passed through her. Not fear, not doubt. Something else. Instinct. Like something was coming, something bigger than everything she had already faced. And for the first time since everything changed, her journey felt unfinished. Not in the past, but in the future. Because just as she began to rebuild her life, forces she didn't even know existed were already moving, watching, planning, waiting, and this time, the stakes were far higher than heartbreak, far higher than betrayal, far higher than loss. This time, it was everything.